Right, so. No, it's okay. It's okay. So it's good to be back. I first came to this room and presented to the your ratepayer group in about 2015. I'm sorry that I'm looking a little bit older, but the Taxpayers Union is still here, and it's wonderful to see what I consider probably the strongest ratepayer group across the whole country. I know that you guys feel that you've got up against it, but you wave the flag and do the good work. So really quickly, here with the Taxpayers Union, we stand for this radical idea of lower taxes, less waste, more accountability, our vision of prosperous low tax New Zealand, efficient, transparent and democratically accountable government.
I think it's...
Oh, no, that's not me, that's on... So we're very much the retail end as opposed to the traditional think tank. So this morning, a young chap who works for Greenpeace got up and he put on a polar bear costume. Not because he wants to get into a polar bear costume, but to make that emotional connection to you that the ice is melting, etc., and you should take this very seriously. So I set up the Taxpayers Union with David Farrer on the basis that there's not, or wasn't, the voices on the other side, on the centre right, waving the flag for fiscal prudence. And you may see sometimes our student interns get into Porky the Waste Hater or the Debt Monster. It is very much the same. So on the one hand, we're the think tank and we do with the more serious work, but we also do the salty. For example, you would have seen the sort of grassroots campaigning as part of our Stop Three Waters effort. More recently, some of the terrifically depressing stories, such as quite literally using $4 million of your money to cure Kauri dieback with whale music and karakia. This stuff you could not make up if you tried. So we'll talk about tonight a couple of things. Obviously, local government reform. In some ways, the speech I'm going to give tonight on that is the one I've been waiting 11 years to give. It excites me terribly. There is some major threats to it, which I'll come to. And then we'll talk about the poll. Been a big day today. The Taxpayers Union with our monthly poll came out today, and it's not good news if your name is Christopher Luxon, unfortunately. And I talk about the fiscal situation, co-governance and the sort of march on democracy which impacts local government, and then perhaps a path forward. So let's start with local government reform. The government, in effect, picked up almost every taxpayer union policy for local government. We met with Simeon Brown late last year, and we could not have been happier. Because for the first time in probably all of our lifetimes, there was political upside for the government staring down local body politicians. Normally the first rule of becoming a local MP is don't fall out with your local mayor. That LGNZ speech that Christopher Luxon gave, where it was rudely given only 10 minutes. The Prime Minister was literally given less time in that 2-day conference than the trans rock, paper, scissors performance in one of the sessions. Now, that is all very well to whack politically, but it is resulting in real reform. The first is benchmarking performance. Some of you will remember that we do. I've never found a donor to pay for it. It's a huge cost for me, but our ratepayers report. Imperfect, but the best effort that I'm aware of at actually benchmarking and league tabling of local councils. The government is in effect picking that up and is going to run with it. We're currently putting it together again this year, but by next year the government should have it. In fact, they were so receptive that I learned last week that when we met with DIA officials on this, one of the suggestions we gave was a common general ledger or cost classifications, accounting classifications for expenses, etc., across the whole sector, and they're picking that up. The second headline thing that the government's really run with is rates caps. And I can tell you that they are looking at models, particularly from Australia, based on if you want to go over CPI, you either need to get a referendum and approval from your community, or you will need government permission. The real game plan, though, is what inflation figure is used, because there's consumer price index, there's obviously the producer price index, but local government are already trying to screw the scrum and create one of their own self-governing sort of indexes, where their own cost escalation will fuel the model for which keeps the cap. See the problem there? Removing the power of general competence is one where the government has indicated they want to go there, as well as changing the purposes of the Local Government Act out to take away these horrible four well-beings, which is basically let councils do whatever they like. As long as they can connect it to some sort of well-being in the community, they can do it. Step back a generation before the 2002 Act, the council, everything the council do had to relate to a specific legislative power or duty. The cost recovery review is around putting some, and this is, we haven't seen the detail of this yet, this is around charges where the council says it relates to X, it is controls other than judicial review to actually make sure that's the case, or it reflects reality. The government calls it what it calls an accountability review, and this is where a lot of the media attention has been around a common code of conduct. I can say, as a former chair of the New Zealand Free Speech Union, that it is effing outrageous the situation we have in free speech around local councils, where it isn't just one or two cases, it is rife where councillors say the incorrect thing, or goodness forbid, take on the officials or the majority view on the council and get codes of conduct, ethical complaints for daring to do that, or being uncollegial or leaking to the media, for example, on things that, frankly, the public should know. So the government is picking that up and is currently drafting a code of conduct that will be applied across the country, as opposed to councils having individual ones. This one is, I said this was the speech I always wanted to give, this is super nerdy. If you're a company director, you have a statutory right to information. Common sense. You can ask your chief executive to take it, for information he's required to give it to you. That does not exist around council tables. It's all very well for the Taxpayers Union to get hoppity mad, to go and give piss-take awards for wasting money or complain about playgrounds. But if you're a local councillor, how do you do your job as a governor if the very person who you're supposed to be the check and balance on, i.e. the chief executive, controls the information for which you receive? And if there was one thing we were urging on the last government and the government before, I remember going and meeting Anne Tolley before she went back, when she was local government minister, literally in her beehive office, and this was our number one thing. And boy, it is coming, and boy, it can't come soon enough. This radical idea of giving councillors the power to be able to require information. Because at the moment, the incentives are all the wrong way around. If you are a mayor your incentives are to get close to the executive in order to be able to do your job. We see this, it's why the Super City, I would argue, has failed. The centre-right leader, Leslie Simpson, has always cozied up to Phil Goff or prior to that, Ben Brown. Because if you were the contrarian, if you were the fly in the ointment, you were simply excluded from being able to get the information to be able to do your job. I mentioned the Common General Electric. I also have another thing that the government hasn't picked up on, but it's a thing we're lobbying about, and we've never talked publicly about it. We're partly testing this. So it's quite possible that the local government blob could get its way and water down some of the reforms I mentioned, particularly around the purpose statement. So the Taxpayers Union have an idea, and it's this. If you're in the private sector, you have a general prohibition on misleading or deceptive conduct under the Fair Trading Act. The first test of Consumer Law 101 is, are you in trade? And councils and the government, they're not. Here's our radical idea. Change the Fair Trading Act, or deem councils, for the purposes of the Fair Trading Act, to be in trade. They can't be misleading or deceptive. Now, how could even the cheek of local government in New Zealand argue against that? But here's the real genius of it. It means the BS that officials get away with and serve up to councillors is vulnerable should anyone challenge it in court. The example I use, because I'm married an Aucklander, is in Auckland we now have 3 rubbish collections, not 2. We have the waste, the recycling, and now the organic, the composting. Because heaven forbid we don't want to use, and it's now costing us more money because they actually need the protein to go down in incinerators, but people are using these other bins. The justification for this was, of course, climate. The modelling deliberately excluded the extra trucks going around. I would argue this sort of BS, misleading and deceptive, that's what the next step we want to tackle. All of this was looking great until the 19th of January, where we had, who I would argue, the strongest minister in the current government replaced with the climate change minister, Simon Watts. Now, Simon Watts was sworn in on the Monday, and ministerial diaries show that that night he was at Charlie Noble, beautiful restaurant in Wellington. Go there if you want to see how Wellington, unfortunately, really works. On the very night he was sworn in. Your humble Taxpayers Union cannot get a meeting with him, nor anyone in his office, despite with the last minister not quite hand in glove, but talking almost every week and getting involved with officials on something with respect. We think, I know we're getting to look at costumes, but on the serious policy side, I would argue that there is some nous there. Now, I'm not embarrassed to say that because as climate change minister, Simon Watts refused to meet with Federated Farmers, our largest emitter, before setting the next climate change target. So, could be a problem. And it's fair to say that some of the stuff is up in the air. Really quickly, the other big issue, which is clearly affected Tauranga, for which you would have seen the Taxpayers Union. It was unfortunately too little too late, but sending, what was it, about 15,000, or it was a significant number of emails within half a day, because we're quite radical. The Taxpayers Union believe that local government should be accountable to voters. And every time the Hastings District Council appoint children, or the unelected children, sorry, be very clear, unelected children, or Tauranga City Council appoint unelectedly went on to committees, you were doing damage to that. And I'm very proud that my organisation, we're not a race-based or a treaty or a one law for all group, but we do stand for, under that lower taxes, less waste, more accountability loan. We are Democrats, and that is a real problem, and it's coming from within the sector and it's getting worse. That is what we need to snuff out, and it's something that Simeon Brown was very strong on, and again, a little bit worried. The government also announced just this weekend previous weekend, too many polls, the changes to, or basically replacing a common complaint I get from ratepayers is around development contributions, replacing that with what used to be called betterment levies, value capture levies. Basically, you own a piece of land, let's say it hasn't got articulated water or road access, local government comes along, spends a bunch of money to fix it, increases the value of your land, basically a very targeted charge directly linked to the money spent on that infrastructure. Now, as I say, deal with the detail, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't want Mahi Drysdale turning up to my place saying, we're going to build you a cycleway, and your land's going to be worth more for it. Yeah, right. So there is, there's both the control on what it is used for, and the second issue is around if you've got a monopoly on the provision, and of course we know how efficient councils are at providing infrastructure, that it may not work if you're simply paying far more than what you should be. So, some things here. The government would argue that they are tackling the co-governance interference in local government with the new Resource Management Act. They say that it is going to be so based on property rights that the Taxpayers Union need not worry. We'll see. And the last one is around treaty settlements. You hear it's what we in the office call the National Party fudge, because it is a fudge. They say right through the last election that they don't like co-governance, don't believe in it for delivery of public services, but we need to respect the treaty settlements. The fudge, or the issue is that since the John Key era, treaty settlements have run roughshod over local democracy. The rumour is we're about to see it and we'll be knowing, but I'll hold up the example of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council that is subject to this. For the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to change an environmental plan, it must go to something called the Hawke's Bay Environmental Committee, which is 50-50 council and iwi appointments, and it's either 2/3 or 3/4 majority to pass. That is part of a treaty settlement, and it is not clear how we unwind that, because boy, that is not democratic. So let's move right along. Poll. So there was a poll today. As Philip said earlier, the mayoral ratings, to explain how that worked. So every month the polling company we pay to do it, samples 1,200 random voters. They ask a bunch of questions, and something that we inserted about 18 months ago was, do you have a rank out of 5, 1 being very unfavourable, 5 being very favourable, what your opinion is of your local mayor? And of course, you put that together over the space of 18 months, you collect enough responses that we put together a league table. And I know he hasn't been mayor for long, but if I was advising Mr. Drysdale, I might point out that only a few months into the job, because politicians tend to start high and then come down, to be 40th out of the 51 mayors ranked is a bit of a concern. And that's not all the mayors, the very small councils, the sample size was too small, meaning the margin of error was too large, and we didn't rank them. But for Tauranga, it's big enough, we had enough people to have I think the margin of error was about 3%. But it was negative 6% favourable, less unfavourable. But national politics. So the trend over time really speaks for itself. Not only is the government, at least in the eyes of the public, is failing. And so the real question is why is that and what can be done? Look, I'm in one of the, I'm pretty, this particular neighbourhood, this area is not known as the hotbed of Marxism and socialism. So I was talk among friends because I'm sure that at least some of you would agree that a return to a Hipkins Ardern era reliant on the Māori Party is a scary prospect. And it gives me absolutely no joy. I was on ZB tonight on Radio New Zealand tomorrow morning. And other than pivot to why we think the government is failing, what the heck do you say? We can get into that. Do you remember, basically since 1996, my whole, so I can remember talking about politics, remember we used to always say that, you know, that Winston Peters, damn him, he only has to convince 1 in 20 to vote for him. He's now the mainstream guy. Sorry, I'm looking up. I thought this was So over time, we can see, of course, that on the left and the right, blue being on the right, the total centre right vote. Today's poll, in case you missed the news, is 58 seats, the centre right, versus 62 for the centre left. The Nats were up slightly, as but Labour were up more. New Zealand first on just over 5%, 5.1. But the headline, which we couldn't, you know, the poll's a poll, we don't order what it's going to say, obviously, is that Christopher Luxon is behind Christopher Hipkins, the preferred Prime Minister. That is the first of the four, certainly the first time in our poll outside of an election period where that has happened. My pollster tells me you really have to go back to John Key, Alan Clark era to find this. It is seriously concerning if you are for the Nats in the room. But this is what I want to show you. Is in relation to Peters, again, remember Peters historically has always been much more unfavourable where most people disliked him. But him being polarising was fine because he only needs the 5%. He only needs the 1 in 20. He's mainstreamed. I want to show you, of course, in post-Peters, you've got Shane Jones. We do, every month we do Hipkins, Luxon, Seymour and Peters, and then we just like to insert other people. You know, this is actually a screenshot out of our, no, this is off our, no, we didn't release this actually publicly. Some of the screenshots in here are from our, we do a full polling report for our key donors, but we don't release everything, but I'm giving you all the source there. This is what's incredible, and I'd argue that this is what the left have successfully done with treaty principles, because it's pre-school lunches, teachers' lunches, is this collapse of Seymour. So back when, this graph doesn't go back far enough, but back when Judith Collins was leader of the opposition, there was a time where David Seymour's net favourable was actually higher than Judith Collins. David was the strongest leader in terms of favourable and unfavourable in the centre right, and yet now, you know, he's in serious trouble. And this is probably the cost of, and I'll come on to treaty principles in a moment, but by successfully polarising that issue, because I can tell you from polling 6 months ago, it was not, the public were on the side of treaty principles, has done, particularly David Seymour, not so much the ACT Party vote, but David Seymour, a lot of damage. So you can see the significance of, this is meant favourability, not preferred PM. So again, scale of 1 to 5, favourable, less unfavourable. Now, a lot of people that think like us think that the treaty or constitutional or social division is a big issue. It's not. I'm sorry to tell you, it's just not. I said on Radio New Zealand Morning Report a month ago, as a result of our last poll, I made a comment that I consider the path that we are on of racial division the biggest threat to the long-term prosperity of New Zealand and my capabilities to succeed here. But that's not what the polls say. So simply saying that Chris Luxon needs to harden up on the treaty or things like that is that's how we think, but the data does not support that. What is it? It's cost of living, it's the economy. And this is what I will be arguing for any time someone puts a microphone in front of me, is it's the economy, stupid. And that is what the government needs to get on with, because in a little over 18 months, Christopher Luxon's going to go to the polls and have to ask the electorate, the famous Reagan question: do you feel better off in our case, than 3 years ago? And right now, the strong answer is no, I don't. And the question is, are we going to be right now, because the stats, they never adjust for population, but when you adjust for population, we are in the longest back-to-back quarter recession in New Zealand's recorded history. It doesn't look that bad because when we have a little bits of growth, it's been as a result of population. But per person, we're in the longest back-to-back quarterly recession. And that's the result. So, I am sick of people calling me, and I know it's going to happen even more thanks to that bloody Taxpayers Union courier poll. Can the National Party credibly change leaders? You are risking serious implosion. I've not done the data on it. I'm sure that I could ask Perplexity. If you guys aren't using Perplexity AI for nerdy questions like this, you should. But there will be it would signal failure and it would signal panic. In fact, I think it is a huge risk that the centre right talk themselves into the ground, like the way the centre right have been split on the Treaty Principles Bill, that it could become self-fulfilling. That's a possible worry. And then, of course, if not Luxon, who? If he wasn't a take, I'll talk about it. And at what cost? So then you're left with, what is Christopher Luxon's pathway back to power? And two things are really quite chilling. The first is very much anecdotal. I send the Taxpayers Union, we get disproportionately well in January. So everyone obviously shuts down for Christmas. A lot of my student interns and part-time researchers want to work over summer. And so we get them back in January, and because it's quiet in the media, we do really well. But one of the things I deliberately do is I send them down to Parliament. I hope this, I don't normally do this with donors' money, but I say, take my card, go and take Beehive staffers out for a beer or a coffee. And the overwhelming reports is that in one comment in particular, really, it came up in our weekly staff meeting, and
all the staff agreed it was an issue that was something they were surprised with, is that the attitude of these beehive staffers, and the words were, well, we've done the hard work, now we have to just wait for it to cycle through. And I put to you, if that is reflecting the view of cabinet ministers, then that's really are in trouble. Because they had a great first 100 days, there was a great mini budget that actually did cut some spending just after they were elected. But realistically, what has been the macroeconomic reform since about, well, really last calendar year? Last year's budget increased spending on Grant Robinson in real terms and as a proportion of the economy. That is all you need to know to determine that the cuts you hear about when you open the newspaper or watch the news are simply not true. So let's so how does trade middle work? They don't care about the treaty. How does race and treaty issues fit? For the average voter, it is noise and it's division. This is where I think that's my concern with where ACT is at, is that its branding is currently all around the treaty and we've lost the middle voter. I think it is amazing. I'm not seeing any signs in Tarawera, but I think it's just incredible around Auckland and Wellington, the degree to which, notwithstanding the extreme rhetoric in that Summit Committee on treaty principles, the way they've captured the middle voter with a very moderate message, together for the treaty. It's a very moderate message. It's almost Orwellian in its sort of opposite of what they actually mean, but unfortunately it's really worked. And you think about the way we run through waters, that probably, and I know from the public meeting in Tarawera, wasn't that great in the flyers by the airport there, that it was funded by people like us on the end, really concerned about the Ngāi co-governance. But we won it by not mentioning co-governance. It was 10 words: higher water costs, more bureaucracy, no local control, less democracy. My point is this, that we win over the middle voter with quite moderate, reasonable messages. And the problem for the government is that on the one hand, those moderate messages haven't been made. The other side has been doing that. And two, they've been validated by a Prime Minister throwing, frankly, Seymour under the bus at any opportunity on treaty principles. We've got this investment summit that's only in a few days' time, on Thursday, Friday. Christopher Luxon has really put his brand around that. Chris Bishop's running it. We'll see how it goes. And of course, Budget 2025. What is so unique about the current environment is that the Nats are down in the polls, but from everything I can tell, they're not going to do what Jim Bolger did, as when he came back in the polls, is soften. Because I think even they know that if they soften, they're stuffed. And so the question is, can National get with the zeitgeist? The whole centre-right around the world is getting momentum because it's the end of the BS. For the last 8 or so years, the Western democracies have kidded themselves, including New Zealand, that we're going to have carbon zero, it's going to cost nothing, and we're going to get more jobs. Well, I'm sorry, the BS is now over. Don't gaslight us. But it seems the National Party haven't yet figured that out. And I'd argue that's the issue. We'll come on to the fiscals now, which is budget for 2025, and the last comment there is, of course, is always the unknown. Governments are made by events. It looked like in 2019, early 2020, that Simon Bridges was going to be our next Prime Minister, and then COVID came along. Events. So, I asked my in-house economist to give me a couple of slides on the fiscal situation, and he put together a summary slide for me, which I'm going to quickly go through because I'm running out of time. But as you can see, it's not really cheery news. What this graph is the tax revenue from the various fiscal updates. So the government has two primary fiscal and economic updates: the May budget, and then what's called the HEFA, the half-year fiscal and economic update, published, particularly the last one, literally a couple of days before Christmas. And as you can see, as you work sort of the wrong way around, but with each update, the revenue forecasts get worse and worse for the same time period. And on the other side, as we update over the same time period, the costs are getting worse and worse. This is a graphical illustration of when the media say there were dire numbers out just before Christmas and that half-year fiscal economic update. Oh, this is my what cuts graph. And then, of course, the budget blowouts. Now, the only way Nicola Willis in that half-year fiscal update gets back to surplus is by changing what the meaning or the agreed meaning of what a surplus is to exclude ACC. We are over the fiscal horizon, over the next 5 years. We don't get back into surplus. And in fact, where New Zealand is now is in the zone of what's called a structural deficit. It is no longer surplus and deficit based on the relative health of the economy, of the economic cycle. It is now baked in until you make quite radical changes in policy. And you see that if you're a nerd, go to the Treasury website and just go straight to the debt projections, because that cuts out all the BS. It also cuts out any issues between capital expending and operating expenditure. Just look at the debt. The red is percentage of GDP, and this is, you get that down, it's all about your growth projections going forward. So, we're not running this on my machine, so I can't do it. This is normally the time I say go to around debtclock.nz, and you can see in real time the debt clock. It's currently running at 81,000 per household in total government liabilities right now. It must be 91. Sorry, it must be 91. By the December next year, it'll be 100,000. So as you go home tonight, every letterbox you pass is a $91,000 in addition on the mortgage. And we're borrowing faster than except in the height of COVID. We're borrowing faster than Grant Robinson. I'm well over time, so
Keep going.
So how do you fix it? So we're looking at about a $12 billion gap between our income and the government's take and spend. Almost all roads come back down. I'm sorry for because there's a couple of people in here over 65. All roads come back to NZ Super. It is superannuation that is the big kahuna. There's some stuff you can do around social investment that actually Bill English was in the office today talking to the chaps and doing a slide deck on it. And of course, recycling capital, which is that horrible dirty word, asset sales. But the largest asset on the government books is actually housing. It's KO housing. And it's a real question. It's much, the SOE portfolio is a lot smaller. It's housing. And there's some stuff, it's what Bill was arguing today, is rather than commissioning the government to spend money on it, put the long-term contracts out there, because it's ultimately the government paying for people to live in them, and get private sector money in. There are some ways you can do it, but those are the big hurdles. Everything else, yep, the Reserve Bank's doubled in size, yep, we have 400 people and not actually soldiers, but manning desks at the Ministry of Defence. Yep, we've got 3,500 people at the Ministry of Education. But all of that is actually chump change compared to 12 billion they've got to find. So the real question for New Zealand is, and I come back to this, what I said earlier, is I think the biggest challenge is this path that we're on around co-governance and the racial division. Because the conclusion that we've come to is that it actually doesn't matter the economic settings if you're an economy based on grift. Our most important resource is probably water, and it's currently the Ngāi claim in the South Island for governance, not co-governance, governance of the water. If that goes through and the government does not overrule it, I don't see how we are a prosperous society in the long term when you're most important, what is New Zealand endowed? Australia has iron ore and coal and gas and uranium. Well, we've got water, fuels our agriculture, and fuels hydraulic electricity. If that resource allocation is dependent on frankly graft, then it's all over. I know it's cheering, yeah. Love government. And so it really comes back to, and this is actually it was a throwaway line David Seymour made on the phone this morning when I was giving him his terrible poll results, is, are we to be a country where we're cutting up the bait or we're going fishing? The role of the Taxpayers Union in this particular area is to be the canary in the mine, but in the same way as Three Waters, lead those sorts of debates and fight for high principle. Not with the out there rhetoric, but with moderate messages. Canary in the coal mine. Oh yeah, canary. Well, we'll soon will be. You can tell it on this late at night. Holding their feet to the flame and holding them to account. The government, when are we going to ever get in our lifetime an MEP government elected where all three parties were elected on a mandate to cut spending? Nicola Willis is getting the grief for cutting the spending, but actually hasn't done it. That is a major issue and something that we need to hold to account. And set the course for fiscal correction. Some of the policy solutions. Look, we actually launched a paper today on full expensing of capital. I'd love someone to ask me about it because it's the best tax idea you probably never heard of, but it's wonderful. But I have run out of time. If you don't get our emails, please do scan the QR code, or if you want to become involved in any way in the Taxpayers Union, please approach me afterwards. There was an incredible group here, for which many of the people involved in the room, called the Tauranga Ratepayers Alliance. It ran out of steam a little bit as a result of the very depressing decision in Naima made to keep in place the commissioners. But if there are people that want to get that re-established, I'm sure we can make it happen. Thank you for the time.